Alright, we're back to an update on my windows. This is the process of epoxying the joinery back together, sealing in grain, fixing problems, etc. Kind of go over a few of the techniques I'm using here. This particular sash you're looking at is an upper sash, so the bottom rail, which is there, that my finger's pointing at, the pins that go through the tenons have either snapped or been dramatically bent, and they're just pieces of wood, and basically that rail was dragging or pulling away from the mortise and tenon joint by almost a quarter inch. So I had it pulled apart. I soaked it with epoxy for about 45 minutes from both faces, and then squeezed it up with the clamps and made sure I wasn't twisting this rail. I don't want it to get out of orientation. I don't want it to twist like this or twist like this. So I just watched the joint as it comes together here on the end, and you can kind of see here what that looks like. And you'll also see that I've got some shrink wrap here, and that's because one of my corners was splintered out, and so I epoxied that, and then I just use shrink wrap to clamp it, and that way I don't have to worry about clamps on the frame while I'm doing other things. The other thing is that's really important when you're gluing these up. Like I basically put epoxy on the heads of all the pins. These are the wooden pins that go in and keep the mortise and tenon joint from separating. And then the visible joint here, I puddle epoxy on so that it can drain down in. This is all done to help with water penetration, specifically on the exterior face. It's also being done to stiffen the frame up. They're quite flimsy. And what's really important is once I get all this glue and I got it squeezed up is that it is square and flat. I do not want to clamp this thing up at a square and then have a whole world of issues with it not wanting to go back into the jamb and or mate at the check rail here with the lower sash with the weather strip that's going to be on, actually it'll be on this side right here. So that's really important. And so that's the techniques there. Then over here you can see where I have a fix. Let me get around my bench here. This is just a typical fix where I had the grain had split down into the rail. So I got epoxy worked up into that crack and then squeezed it this way and this way to keep the joint, all the crack mated back together correctly and back together. So that's just a basic joint. This sash has actually already been epoxied, so this is kind of what it looks like. I'll do a lot of sanding and cleanup. The other thing you can see here is that I have epoxy on the end grain to seal it so that it does not absorb any moisture that it gets exposed to. Here's another, this is a bottom sash, and this is one of my real largest sashes. It's like 40 by 40 almost. So here you can see where I've puddled in the epoxy on the joint. You can see all the checking in the surface. And I basically did a very light coat of epoxy on the surface and just did one coat, nothing more. I let it penetrate the surface and solidify that wood grain to keep it from moving in the future. So once you putty it and paint it, it won't keep cracking as the weather changes and the humidity and stuff expose that sash to movement. And over here is probably my most dramatic work that I have to do. You can see how split and checked up that bottom rail is. That has some pretty significant cracking and checking in it, and that's all from weather exposure. The paint has failed. It's gray like this because there was no paint on it. All the paint was missing when I took it out, and it's been exposed for a very long time with no paint. And that weather moisture coming into that wood, penetrating it, and then coming out and going in and coming out and going in causes that wood to move. And as that wood keeps moving back and forth, it slowly cracks. It's not really a defect, it's just the natural decomposition of wood and its reaction to moisture, the moisture cycle over and over and over again. This is also on one of the most exposed elevations of the house. That's one of the reasons the moisture is so dramatic right here as far as the checking goes. But once I have this sanded up, I'll blow it out, and then I will putty all that checking and then paint it and it'll be looking pretty sharp. I think that's pretty much it for now. That's just a quick glance at the different techniques I'm using to glue up these joints. Again, I'm sealing in grain, which is one of the reasons I'm doing the pins. It also keeps them from moving. A lot of my pins were popping out. I actually had pins on some of the windows in the attic that had popped out so dramatically that they were rubbing grooves in the opposite mating piece on the upper or lower sash. And I know you're not supposed to use round pins, and everybody swears up and down by square pins, but these are square pins, and they're moving all over the place. So, but on the flip side, they're 133 years old, so I don't know what to expect. The other thing that I'm doing is right here. You can see this is where the sash lock mounts, and I've gone in here and applied epoxy in here to stiffen up this wood fiber. The puttied holes are from the original sash stop, or sash lock, I'm sorry, and I have no idea what those are, and the sash locks that were on the sash when I took it apart go in the two open holes. And I basically took like a nail and coated it with epoxy and went in there and just swiped it around the hole. I'm not trying to fill the hole, I'm just trying to get a coat of epoxy in there to absorb into the wood fibers to stiffen them up. So when I go to run my screws back in, they're going to get a really nice bite. And the wood, instead of being soft and giving, it'll be pretty nice. And hopefully that'll help with some of the sash locks and how loose they were when I started. So, and the other thing that I did, which I can't show you, is on the other side of here, you can, so actually, let me see if I can get under there. Well, no, you can't really see. Oh, there you go. That's the mortise for the sash pull. So that's where the metal goes in there. The holes there, I did the same thing. I ran epoxy down in there enough to tighten the fibers up. And that is just to help the screws bite when they go back in, because sometimes those are a little on the loose side, or they've been stripped out because somebody's over tightened them, and that just helps with that. And so, and these are a couple sashes I've already done. They are epoxied and ready for sanding, which I will get on to once all this other stuff cures. This will take 24 hours. I'll let it go for 24, which is probably more than it needs, but it'll give it a good curing time. And once that's done, I'll sand, and that'll be all I do for about a week. Well, anyways, thanks for watching, and that's my next video. Bye.